No husband, no access, honey. The pavilion is for wives of command. The public rope is behind the fuel shed. You can watch from there with the other spectators, or you can watch from the parking lot. Those are the choices I'm offering, and I'd take one of them quickly, because in about 4 hours this pier belongs to people whose names actually appear on a program. The words came off silk. Vanessa Rourke, 44, wore cream the way a ship wears fresh paint, for inspection, not for weather. And she had planted herself at the head of the landing float with a clipboard she did not need and a smile that had never once reached her eyes. Behind her, the pier was becoming a stage. White tablecloths snapped and settled in the morning breeze. A gray destroyer lay alongside, lines doubled, brow gleaming. 2,000 yards out in the channel, a carrier rode at anchor with signal flags climbing her halyards, and between ship and shore, the water moved the way it always moves in July, bright on top, cold underneath, telling the truth to anyone who bothered to read it. The woman Vanessa was addressing had been reading it for 20 minutes. She stood at the rail of the low landing float in a plain navy blue dress, dark hair pulled back in a low knot. No lanyard, no bag, no heels. Flat deck shoes, salt-stained at the seams. She had arrived on foot, alone, past the fuel shed and the bollards, and she had not gone where visitors go. She had gone to the float. She had glanced once at the windsock on the crane mast, and once at the tide line greening the pilings, and then she had chosen the up-current corner of the float and set her feet shoulder-width, the way people stand when the surface under them belongs to them. Master Chief Boatswain's Mate, Abel Torrance, 54, 20 feet away with a fender in one fist, and 36 years of waterfronts behind him, had watched her do it. He had said nothing, but when his youngest line handler drifted a foot too close to a working bight of mooring line, the woman in the blue dress had said, quietly, without turning her head, "Stand by your bowline," and the kid had jumped to it before he thought to wonder who she was. Torrance thought about that for a while. Vanessa Rourke was not finished. Women like the one at the rail were, to her, a category, a known hazard of waterfronts, like gulls and rust. "I know every wife on this pier," she said, closing the distance, silk hissing. "I know every fiancé, every girlfriend, every mother and sister and cousin cleared for that pavilion, because I approved the list myself. I am Vanessa Rourke. My husband commands that destroyer you're standing in front of, which brings us back to you. No ring, no badge, no sponsor. Standing at my float, at my ceremony, 40 feet from the captain's table. So let's hear it. Whose wife are you?" The woman watched the channel a moment longer. Far out, a white speck of a boat lay in the carrier's shadow, small and patient. "Nobody's," she said. "Nobody's." Vanessa's laugh was bright and cold, built to carry, heads turned near the pavilion, which was the point of it. "Then let me explain how a Navy pier works, sweetheart. Access is earned. Mine was earned over 19 years of deployments and duty stations and dining-ins, and it is worn, like this." She touched the pearl at her own throat, the way an officer touches a ribbon. "What exactly are you doing on my float?" "Watching the water." 3 syllables at a time, calm as ballast. It was the calm that did it. Vanessa Rourke had been condescended to by admirals' wives and outmaneuvered by generals' wives, and she had clawed her association presidency out of both, but she had never in 19 years been answered by a woman who was not afraid of her, and the sensation arrived like a wasp under the silk. Her voice dropped out of its public register. "You think I don't know what you are? Waterfront girls have been drifting up to change of commands since before you were born. You picked a big one. Cameras, captains, a strike group's worth of khaki, and you, posing at the rail like the figurehead of something. This float is for the barge detail and for families of command. And you? Her hand came up, one lacquered finger aimed like a signal flare. Are neither. Kayla Betancourt, 23, standing at the lemonade table with a pitcher sweating in her hands, saw everything that happened next and would tell it. Later, exactly true. She saw the woman in blue turn her head at last and look at Vanessa Rourke. Not angry, not frightened, just present, the way weather is present. She heard her say in that same level voice, "Ma'am, step back from the edge. Deck's wet." And she saw Vanessa Rourke hear it as an order. Here, underneath the courtesy, the unmistakable architecture of an order, and refuse it the only way left to her. 2 hands, flat, into a stranger's shoulders, with 19 years of borrowed rank behind them. The woman in the blue dress went off the corner of the landing float, backward, into 18 feet of harbor. The splash went up white. A tray went down somewhere with a crash of glassware. The band, warming up beside the pavilion, stopped mid-phrase, one trumpet note hanging over the pier like a dropped flare, and 40 people stood absolutely still. For one full second, nobody moved. And then the waterfront did what waterfronts are drilled to do, which is everything at once. "Man overboard, starboard side of the float." Torrance's voice went out flat and enormous, a foghorn with consonants, and the morning broke into procedure. His line handler snatched the orange ring buoy off the rail. 2 sailors from the barge detail hit the ladder at a run. Somewhere up the pier, a whistle shrilled twice, and the reception, silk, seersucker, dress whites, lemonade, surged toward the edge in a single horrified body. Captain Elliot Rourke, 47, had been shaking hands at the brow of his destroyer when the splash went up. He did not see the shove. He saw the water, and a woman in it, and the distance, and he did the arithmetic every surface officer carries in the spine. Cold water, clothed swimmer, hard floats. Get there. His cover came off. His shoulder boards hit the deck of the float where he dropped his jacket, and he was down the ladder to the waterline before his wife had finished composing her face. He needn't have hurried. The woman had gone in backward, which is the worst way, and come up the best way. No gasp, no thrash, no wild grab at the hull. She surfaced with her eyes already open, exhaled once, put her face into the ebb to read its direction, and took 2 long, economical strokes that laid her alongside the ladder as neatly as a boat coming to a brow. 1 hand on the rung. A pause. Not weakness. Inventory. Then she climbed. "Ma'am, I've got you. I have it." 3 words. No heat. But she let him take her forearm for the last rung, because he had come down for a stranger, without checking first who was watching, and that was worth letting him finish. She stood on the float streaming harbor water from a plain blue dress, hair loosed from its knot and slicked black against her neck, and while 40 spectators looked for horror in her face and found none, she wrung the hem out with 2 twists, looked down the float and said, conversationally, 68 degrees, ebb setting south. A beat. Her eyes found Torrance's. "And you're after Camel's chafing, Master Chief. She'll need a new gripe before the wind gets up this afternoon." Torrance looked at the Camel, the floating spacer between float and pier, its lashing worn, shiny, where the tide had been working it since Thursday. He had flagged it himself at 0600. It was on his own clipboard, in his own handwriting, and no one on that pier had read his clipboard. "Aye, ma'am," he said very slowly. "She will." A hospital corpsman came through the crowd with a blanket and the beginnings of a stretcher argument. He got 3 words, too. "Thank you." "No." And the blanket accepted, because refusing warmth is theater, and she did not perform. Elliot Rourke retrieved his jacket from the deck and settled it over her shoulders on top of the blanket, and if a career could be read in a face, his said plainly that he did not care whose event this was. "Ma'am, I'm sorry," he said. "That was my wife." "I know," she said, which was somehow worse for him and better for her, and she squared his jacket on her shoulders with one small motion, a settling of seams, a leveling of the collar, that Abel Torrance had seen 10,000 times in 36 years, and never once from a civilian. People wear a borrowed coat. Sailors wear a uniform. It was the difference between draped and squared away, and it went down into his memory next to the windsock, the tide line, the bow line, and the camel, which was when Vanessa Rourke got her voice back. She lunged at me. The sentence arrived with the pitch and polish of something that had been rehearsed in the 4 seconds it took to say it. "You all saw how close she was standing. I asked her, nicely, I was nice, to move behind the rope, and she came at me, and I reacted. Any of you would have. A strange woman. No badge, no sponsor, practically on top of the captain's table. Her hand found her pearls. Her chin found its angle. I will not apologize for protecting this event. 40 witnesses had seen 2 hands and a shove, but her voice was the loudest thing on the pier, and it wore cream silk, and it had approved the guest list, and lies float best in exactly that kind of water. Warm on top, with something underneath that nobody wants to touch. Near the pavilion, one spouse nodded uncertainly, then another. A third looked at her shoes. It costs nothing to nod along with silk, and it can cost a husband's next set of orders not to. And everyone under that awning had done the same arithmetic Kayla Betancourt was doing at the lemonade table. The morning's truth had begun, quietly, to be renegotiated. The woman in the wet blue dress said nothing at all. She adjusted the borrowed jacket a 1/4 inch at the shoulder, turned back to the rail, and resumed watching the channel, where, in the shadow of the anchored carrier, the small white boat still waited, patient as the tide. By 09:30 the story had been fully refitted. It moved through the pavilion the way a rumor moves through a ship, fastest along the routes of least resistance, changing shape at every hatch. At the lemonade table it was she lunged. By the gift table it was she'd been hovering near the captain's table all morning. At the far rope line, where the junior wives stood, it had grown a whole biography. No ring, no name anybody knew. One of those women who follow the fleet. And honestly, a voice lowered, delighted with itself, at her age. Vanessa Rourke conducted it all without appearing to conduct anything, which was her particular genius. A word here, a raised eyebrow there, a hand laid briefly on a forearm. I just hope she doesn't make a scene when security arrives. These types always do. And the machinery turned on its own. Within 30 minutes, the woman standing quietly at the rail in a borrowed jacket had become, for most of the pavilion, a problem being handled. People stopped looking at her directly. That is the first thing a pylon takes from you, being looked at like a person. 2 of the association's officers flanked Vanessa like escorts. Denise, wife of the destroyer's executive officer, laughed at everything Vanessa said a half-second too quickly. Margot, wife of a squadron staffer, had appointed herself witness. I saw the whole thing, she told a circle of hats and sunglasses. The lunge, I saw it. More or less. I was turned partly away, but you could feel it. The aggression coming off her. Vanessa is honestly lucky. The one person who had actually seen the whole thing was refilling the lemonade. Kayla Betancourt had watched it happen from 11 feet away, with a pitcher in her hands. The windsock woman calm at the rail. Vanessa's finger. The words step back from the edge. And then 2 flat hands, and a shove that Kayla felt in her own shoulders. She had opened her mouth about it exactly once, to Denise, and gotten a look that pressed her back down like a hand on the crown of her head. Her husband was a petty officer 3rd class, with 8 months aboard Captain Rourke's destroyer. The arithmetic of the pier was not complicated, and everyone at the lemonade table could do it. Vanessa did it out loud, just once, in passing, with a smile. "Kayla, sweetheart, you've got the best view of the float. Such a shame you were so busy with the pictures when it happened. Weren't you?" It was not a question. Kayla, 23 years old, looked at the ice melting in the lemonade and heard herself say, "I was pretty busy, ma'am." The word ma'am tasted like a coin. 11 feet away, the woman in the borrowed jacket watched the water and asked her for nothing at all, which somehow made it worse. Base security arrived at 0950. 2 masters-at-arms, polite, bored, allergic to silk. The woman gave her name to the senior of the two in the same level voice she had used all morning. "Holloway. M. Holloway." The visitor log at the gate said the same. "M. Holloway. Guest?" With the sponsor line blank. Not falsified, not forged. Blank. The petty officer frowned at the blank the way you frown at a chart with no soundings, and behind him, Vanessa Rourke leaned in like the tide. "Blank," she repeated, savoring it. "No sponsor. On ceremony day. I want that noted. Officer, I want everything today noted." Abel Torrance chose that moment to walk his fender up the float, unhurried, and park himself at the security petty officer's shoulder. He was not a man who inserted himself into silk matters on the general principle that mooring lines outlast luncheons, but he had spent the morning accumulating a file he could not close. He spoke low, one professional to another, while Vanessa performed outrage at the other rail. "Before you write anything with her name in it," he said, "know what I know. That woman read the wind and the tide before she picked where to stand. She kept my kid clear of a working bite with the right 5 words in the right order. She came out of 68-degree water like it was a swim call and told me my after camel was chafed, which it is, and which nobody knew but me and this clipboard." He let that sit. Nobody teaches a dress to stand clear of a bite. The petty officer looked at the woman at the rail. The woman at the rail watched the channel, where the white boat in the carrier's shadow had not moved in an hour, and neither had she. "So who is she, Master Chief?" "Don't know," Torrance said, "but I'd find out before I helped anybody put paper on her." Behind them, Vanessa Rourke's voice rose to its ceremonial register, addressing the pavilion, the pier, and history. Before the ceremony, she announced, this float would be cleared of unescorted persons. Every last one. Some stories walk you to their ending in a straight line, and you can feel it coming like weather off the water. If you want to see exactly what the tide does to people who mistake silk for rank, make sure you're subscribed to Honor Tales, because this next part is why this story exists. The security office on the waterfront was a squat concrete room that smelled of toner and old coffee, and at 10:15, Vanessa Rourke occupied it the way an occupying power occupies a customs house. "Unknown female," she dictated, while the duty petty officer typed with the enthusiasm of a man filling sandbags. "Aggressive. No sponsor. Refused repeated lawful requests to relocate behind the spectator line. Made, write this, made physical movements toward the complainant, causing the complainant to respond in self-defense. Complainant. Rourke, Vanessa. Rourke. Yes, those Rourkes." She signed the statement with a flourish that used 3 inches of vertical space, and she felt, for the first time since the splash, entirely herself again. Paper was her water. She had run committees, galas, boards, and ballots. She knew what a signed statement becomes once it exists, a fact with a number that other facts must now answer to. "And the visitor log," she said. "Flag it. A blank sponsor line on ceremony day is a security matter. I want her escorted off the waterfront before the official party arrives. Not asked, escorted. The duty petty officer looked at his screen, where the name M. Holloway sat next to a blankness that had, in the last hour, been promoted from clerical to sinister. He had processed 1,100 visitors that quarter and could not remember one of them. And something about this one, the calm at the float, the Master Chief's 4 quiet sentences, the way the morning kept refusing to add up, made his typing slower with every line. Paper is supposed to make a thing more true. This paper felt like it was making something less true with every keystroke, and he was the one signing the bottom of it. Regulations did technically allow removal of unsponsored visitors at a restricted event. Technically was enough for Silk. He printed the form. The job of serving it rolled downhill and landed, as such jobs do, on the youngest officer within reach. An ensign, 23 years old, 3 weeks aboard, in whites so new they still held the fold lines. He found the subject at the seawall past the fuel shed, standing with a blanket folded over one arm and a borrowed jacket squared on her shoulders like a service coat, watching the anchorage with an attention he mistook, at first, for daydreaming. "Ma'am." His voice cracked on the second syllable, and he hated it. "I have to ask you to move along, off the waterfront. There's a complaint." She turned and looked at him, and he had the strange sensation of being read in a single pass, bow to stern and filed. Not unkindly, the way you'd note a sail on the horizon. "Which boat is yours, Ensign?" He blinked. "The utility boat, ma'am." "Boat 2. I have the boat officer quals, almost. Next month. Zodiac Gray, forward davits." She nodded at it, small against the pier. "When did you last check her bilge?" Silence. A gull laughed somewhere up the crane mast. The ensign, who could have recited the entire visitor policy from memory, discovered he did not know the answer, and discovered in the same instant that she had known he wouldn't, and that she was not going to shame him with it. He stood there in his fold-lined whites, 23 years old, holding a removal order in front of a woman who had just taught him more about his own boat in 9 words than 3 weeks of turnover binders had managed, and some honest instinct in him, the instinct that makes officers, eventually, if it survives, told him which of the 2 pieces of information mattered. "Soon," she said, to the bilge and to his order, and turned back to the water, leaving him holding a form that had never felt so light. On the pier, the fracture that mattered opened quietly. Elliot Rourke had crossed to the pavilion between handshakes and drawn his wife 2 steps out of the silk. 16 years of marriage had taught them to fight at conversational volume with their backs to the room. "Withdraw the complaint." His voice was the one he used on the bridge in fog. "I was there, Vanessa. I pulled her out of the water you put her in front of my crew, my Commodore's guests. You gave a stranger your jacket, each word ironed flat. In front of the entire waterfront, Elliot. Do you have any idea what that looked like? What people are already saying? I am protecting this family's position while you hand out your wardrobe to Harbor Drift, and today of all days." She recovered the register, patted his sleeve, a public gesture for the pavilion's benefit. "Today, I need you to trust that I know how this world works." He looked at her, and something in the look had gone to sea and not come back. At the float, Abel Torrance stood over his clipboard, where the boat plan for the day was clamped under a bulldog clip going rusty at the hinge. 1100. Barge, flagship to landing float. Passenger. Flag. He looked at the word for a long moment. Then he looked at the seawall, where a woman in a wet blue dress stood watching the anchorage like a relieving officer of the deck. And Abel Torrance, who had 36 years of waterfronts behind him and had never once been wrong about weather, went very, very still. There is a kind of knowing that comes on slow, like fog, and a kind that arrives all at once, like the smell of rain before the first drop. What hit Abel Torrance at the float was the second kind, and he spent the next hour doing what good Master Chiefs do with revelation. He checked it. The boat plan first. 1100, barge away from the flagship, 1 passenger, listed not by name but by title. Flag. Standard for a flag officer. He ran his thumb down the rest of the column. The official party, the outgoing admiral, the fleet commander, the chaplain, the band, all listed by name, all arriving by the pier, brow at 11:30. Only one soul in the entire ceremony was coming to the landing float. Only one soul needed it. Then the phone. He called the flagship's first lieutenant, a boatswain he had trained 2 decades ago, and asked one question in the 50-word dialect of men who rig for sea. The new strike group commander. Anybody laid eyes yet? The answer came back with a laugh in it. Negative, Master Chief. Word is she does her own recon. Walked the waterfront at her last 2 commands before anybody knew her face. The chief's mess has a pool going on whether anyone spots her first. Torrance looked down the pier at the seawall and did not laugh. Somebody already spotted her, he said, and hung up. He stood with the phone in his fist and ran the morning back through, item by item, the way you walk a mooring after a blow. The windsock, first thing, before she'd picked her ground. The tide line on the pilings. Stand by your bowline. 5 words. Right order. No panic in them. 68 degrees. Ebb setting south. Spoken from inside the water. The camel nobody knew about but him. The jacket squared like a service coat. Item by item. Each one small enough to explain away. And all of them together, pointing one direction like iron filings in a field. 36 years on waterfronts had taught Abel Torrance that the sea sends its people ahead of its weather. He had simply never watched a strike group arrive in a blue dress before. At 10:40, a lieutenant in service dress whites came down the pier with a garment bag over one shoulder and a radio on her hip, walking with the particular unhurried urgency of a flag lieutenant on ceremony day. Danica Shaw, 28, checked the float, the fenders, the camber of the brow, the angle of the sun, and the chafed after camel, which had been re-gripped with new line in the last hour, and then found herself being watched by a Master Chief with 36 years in his face. "Mornin', Master Chief. Float looks good." "It'll serve." He kept his eyes on hers. "Expecting your passenger at 11. "That's the plan." "Might be," Torrance said, in the tone of a man remarking on clouds. "Your passenger's been on my waterfront since 08. Lieutenant Shaw's face did not change, which told him everything. She looked once, briefly, toward the seawall, at the woman in the wet blue dress with a captain's jacket squared on her shoulders. And when she looked back, there was something underneath the professional blankness that might have been pride, or might have been mischief, or might, in a flag lieutenant, be both at once. "She'll come to the float when she's ready," Shaw said. "She always does. And the wet dress? Wouldn't know, Master Chief. A beat. But I've got service dress whites in this bag, and a barge with a dry cabin. So whatever happened ashore..." Her eyes went flat and cold for exactly 1 second, and Torrance understood that the flag lieutenant knew precisely what had happened ashore, because flag lieutenants always know. "It'll keep until 11. She walked back up the pier. Torrance stood a while at the rail. Then he went and found the senior master-at-arms, off to the side, away from Silk, and spent his entire accumulated waterfront credibility in 4 sentences. "That trespass letter you're being pushed to serve. Walk very carefully with it. If I'm right about who it names, you'll want it never to have existed, and neither will anybody whose signature is on it." He let the arithmetic land. "Check with the flagship before you touch that woman. That's all I'll say." The petty officer looked at his folder as if it had grown warm. Across the pier, Vanessa Rourke, unaware, rode the crest of her morning. The complaint was signed. The escort was ordered. The pavilion was hers again, murmuring its sympathy, and as a final flourish, she had the barge detail rope off the landing float with white ceremonial line and a placard. "Reserved, authorized families of command." She stood back and admired it. Silk settling, sun high, victory total, 20 minutes wide. The strangest part of this whole story is what the woman at the seawall did about all of it, which was nothing. No name dropped, no phone call made, no rescue summoned. If you've ever wondered what it costs to stand that still while smaller people spend borrowed rank on you, and what it sounds like when the bill finally arrives, stay with this one and subscribe to Honor Tales, because the next 10 minutes on that pier are the reason this channel exists. Maren Holloway stood at the seawall with the harbor laid out in front of her like a chart, and read it, because that is what she was doing on that waterfront, and what she had been doing, one way or another, for 27 years. The ebb had another hour in it. The wind would back southerly by 1400 and put a short chop on the channel just in time to bother the ceremony's awnings. The after camel had been regripped. Good. The utility boat's bilge had not been checked. Noted. Somewhere behind her, a reception believed things about her that would not survive the morning, and she let them be believed, because she had learned long ago that a waterfront performs for stars and tells the truth to nobodies, and the truth was worth more. She had not planned the swim, but she'd been measured by colder water than this. October 2015. The destroyer Fanning Cove, 410 feet of gray steel, beam seas building through the middle watch, wind gusting past 40 knots, and the barometer still walking downhill. She was 38 years old, a commander, 11 months in command, and at 0140, a lifeline fitting forward, parted under a boarding sea, and the deck division went out to rig a preventer before the next one took the whole run of wire over the side. Petty Officer Second Class Joaquin Esteves, 26, boatswain's mate, went out with them. He was the one who laughed at everything, the one who could splice in the dark, the one whose mother in Corpus Christi sent tamales to the whole berthing at Christmas. The sea that took him came over the bow quartering and green, and where 4 men had been clipped in there were 3, and a strobe going away down the ship's side into black water at 0200 exactly. She fought the ship around in seas that did not want her around. 11 hours. Boats when the water allowed, helicopter when the ceiling allowed, every rail manned by men who would not come below. They recovered him at dawn, 9 miles down sea, and she wrote to his mother in her own hand, not the form letter, 4 pages, and flew to Corpus Christi on leave to say the part that doesn't fit on paper. The board took 4 months. She gave them everything, the logs, the watch bills, her own decisions laid open on the table like rigging fanned out for inspection, and the board found the fitting had been gun-decked 2 overhauls before she ever took command, inspected on paper, corroded in fact. Signed off by men in offices who had never once stood on that deck in weather. Cleared, they told her, as though the word could be worn. She had stood on the pier at the shipyard afterward, 38 years old, staring at a fitting catalog number on a page, understanding that a signature had killed Joaquin Esteves as surely as the sea had, and that the signature had been dry for 6 years before it did. That was the thing she carried off the Fanning Cove, heavier than the metal they eventually gave her and worth more. Paper lies. water doesn't. A commander who knows her people and her water only through what is signed and submitted will someday kill a laughing man with a blank line no one looked behind. So before every command since, the squadron, both hulls, and now 3,800 sailors and a strike group, Marin Holloway walked the waterfront first. No uniform, because rank arrives ahead of truth and bends everything it touches. No escort, just the water, the lines, the camels, the kids standing too close to working bites. The actual state of the actual world, seen once with her own eyes before anyone knew to paint it. Some walks taught her about chafed camels, others taught her about ships. At the squadron, one dawn walk had found a quarterdeck watch asleep standing up because his department had him on port and starboard for a month, and nobody up the chain had looked. She fixed the watch bill before she ever read her orders aloud. At her cruiser, a walk had found a brow rigged 2 inches proud of the combing, waiting to break somebody's ankle at the exact hour of the change of command. Every command had its blank line, the true thing no report carried. This walk had found the Pier's other hierarchy, the silk one, and what it did to a 23-year-old pouring lemonade 11 feet from an honest answer. That was worth knowing before she claimed these waters. That was worth a wet dress. The sea does not care whose wife you are, she thought, watching the ebb. It never has. It weighs what you are made of, and it publishes its findings without fear or favor. And there is no committee to appeal to, and no list to be approved onto. Half her career she had loved it for exactly that. The other half she had spent trying to build crews that judged each other the way water judges, by buoyancy, not by braid. In her borrowed jacket, salt drying stiff at the seams of the blue dress, she was aware of being, for perhaps another 30 minutes, the most clearly seen she had been in years. A nobody, weighed as a nobody, found wanting by silk, and found solid by a master chief with a clipboard. It was, she thought, the most honest reception a strike group commander ever got. The phone in her hand buzzed once against her palm. Shaw. Barge away in 30, Admiral. Whites aboard. Cabins warm. Marin Holloway looked out at the carrier's shadow, where the small white boat had begun, at last, to move, and turned toward the float. The white ceremonial rope was the first thing she reached, and the man holding the clipboard beside it was the second, and history will record that base security did, in fact, get there first. The senior master-at-arms had made his phone call to the flagship. The flagship had not called back yet, and Vanessa Rourke was standing at his shoulder with a signed complaint, a printed removal order, and the entire weight of the pavilion's attention, and technically remained technically. He took the middle path of cornered petty officers everywhere. He served the paper and prayed. Ma'am, he did not meet her eyes. By direction of the event coordinator, and pursuant to the visitor policy, I'm serving you this notice to depart the waterfront. The form shook, very slightly, in the breeze. There's an appeal process. The pavilion had drifted close behind him, silk and seersucker, arranging itself for the final act it believed it was about to see. Denise had her phone half raised. Margot was narrating quietly to a circle of hats. Vanessa Rourke stood at the petty officer's shoulder, with her chin at its ceremonial angle, and on the destroyer's quarterdeck, too far away to intervene, and close enough to see everything. Elliot Rourke gripped the rail and watched his wife spend the last of something neither of them could get back. "Thank you," Marin said, and took the paper and read it, unhurried, all the way through, as though it were a chart of somewhere she was thinking of going. Description: unknown female, dark hair, blue dress. Basis: unsponsored presence, restricted event, complaint on file. Signature block: V. Rourke, on behalf of the event committee. She folded it once, cleanly along the long axis and slid it into the pocket of the borrowed jacket like a receipt. Which is when Vanessa Rourke, 20 minutes into total victory, and constitutionally unable, to let the machine finish its own work, stepped forward and reached for the collar. "And that," she said, "is my husband's." She took the jacket off the stranger's shoulders herself, both hands, a brisk proprietary strip, shaking it once as if to free it of something. "You'll forgive me. The name is stitched in the collar, Rourke. Right there, see it? It's a family thing. It doesn't drape on strays." She folded it over her arm, lifted her chin, addressed the wet woman and the watching Pier in the same breath. "The blanket you may keep." Kayla Betancourt put down the pitcher. She did not decide to. Her hands decided, and then her feet, and she came out from behind the lemonade table and crossed 11 feet of pier that felt like a mile of open water, and stood next to the woman in the blue dress. Just stood there. Close. Shoulder to shoulder. A 23-year-old with a petty officer's paycheck, taking up a position the whole pavilion could see. She was not brave the way movies are brave. Her hands were wet with condensation, and her heart was going like a bilge pump, and she was already composing the apology she would owe her husband, tonight, for whatever this cost him. She stood there anyway, because she had watched a stranger get shoved into a harbor and then watched 40 adults agree to remember it differently, and some things a person cannot pour lemonade past. Her chin shook. She lifted it anyway. Beside her, very quietly, without turning, the woman in the blue dress said, "Good eye, standing here. Best footing on the float." And Kayla, who would not understand for another 20 minutes what she had just been told, felt steadier at once. Vanessa noticed and filed it under later. She was good at later. Later was where she kept every small defiance the waterfront had ever offered her, each one labeled and shelved and paid back in committee assignments and party lists and the 10,000 invisible taxes a president of the association could levy without leaving fingerprints. The girl with the pitcher had just borrowed against a future Vanessa fully intended to own by supper time. And Marin Holloway, served, stripped, sponsorless, dripping salt on a float she'd been shoved off of 2 hours before, folded her hands in front of her, looked at the woman holding the jacket that still carried the shape of her shoulders, and smiled. Her first smile of the morning. Small, without a single tooth in it, and Abel Torrance, watching from the fender rail, took his cover slowly off his head, the way a man does when he sees weather arrive at last on a long glass. "Keep it dry," she said. Vanessa's reply, whatever it was going to be, and by the set of her mouth it was going to be good, did not happen, because at that moment, up and down the waterfront, from the destroyer's quarterdeck and the harbor office and the crane mast all at once, 8 bells struck, clean and doubled, 4 couplets rolling flat across the water, 1100. Out in the channel, a white hull broke from the carrier's shadow into full sun. At its bow, a staff cut the light, and from the staff snapped a flag, deep blue, carrying 2 white stars. Someone in the pavilion said, "What is—" The barge altered course. Mid-channel, unmistakable, bow swinging until it pointed like a compass needle at one place on the entire waterfront. The landing float. Straight for her. There's a sound a pier makes when it realizes something, and it is not a gasp. It is the opposite. A great subtraction of noise, glassware, and band, and silk, and gulls all thinning out at once, until the only thing left is water against pilings, and 1 diesel coming on plane. "Stand by to receive," Torrance said into that silence, to his detail. Quiet, even. 36 years of Sunday mornings in it. smartly now. The barge came on. It came on the way. Ceremony comes on. Without hurry. Because hurry is for people who can be made to wait. White hull, bright work burning, the 2-star flag hard-edged in the breeze, and the whole pier watched it grow and did the mathematics of its heading over and over, arriving each time at the same impossible answer. The landing float. The roped-off, placarded, reserved for authorized families landing float, where nobody now stood except a boat detail, 2 masters-at-arms, a 23-year-old in a sundress, and a soaked stranger with a folded trespass notice in her borrowed pocket, standing at the upcurrent corner, with her hands loose at her sides, watching the boat come in the way other people watch their front door. Her coxswain took the ebb Marin had been reading all morning and laid the boat alongside the float in one seaman-like swing. No bump, lines across, made fast. And her crew came to attention along her gunwale in a single motion, 4 sailors in whites gone rigid as stanchions. Lieutenant Danica Shaw stepped ashore, garment bag over her shoulder, halted 1 pace in front of the woman in the soaked blue dress, and brought her hand up in a salute you could have set a watch by. "Admiral Holloway." Her voice carried. It was meant to. "Your barge, ma'am. The strike group stands ready." For 1 heartbeat, nothing on that pier moved except the flag. Then the waterfront loudspeaker cleared its throat with a click, and a voice, the harbor office, reading the schedule it had been holding all morning, spoke the words that rearranged every face on that pier at once. Strike group, arriving. Marin Holloway returned the salute, wet sleeve, bare head, harbor water still ticking off the hem of her dress onto the float. And it did not matter, because a salute lives in the spine, not the sleeve, and hers came off her hand like something machined. The float came to attention on its own. No order was given. None was needed. Torrance's detail went rigid. The 2 masters-at-arms straightened as one, and the senior of them, with great presence of mind, folded a certain trespass notice out of his folder and out of existence in the same motion. At the head of the brow, Captain Elliot Rourke came to attention and saluted. Instantly, completely, a career's worth of reflex, and the look on his face wasn't fear. It was arithmetic, finishing. The windsock. The camel. 68 degrees, ebb setting south. I have it. Soon. Up in the pavilion, the recalculation ran like current through a grid. Margot stopped narrating mid-sentence. Denise lowered her phone as though it had grown hot. 40 minds refiled the same 8 items at the same instant. The shove, the splash, the she lunged, the visitor log, the flagged blank, the whisper campaign, the rope, the placard. And every one of those items changed weight as it moved, from ammunition into evidence. And Vanessa Rourke stood in cream silk with a folded jacket over her arm and watched her morning invert. It happened in 4 distinct weathers, and the whole pavilion watched them cross her face in order. Confusion. A boat. A flag. Why is everyone? Disbelief. The lieutenant is saluting the... No. Recognition. Dark hair. Blue dress. Unknown female. Complaint on file. V. Rourke, on behalf of. And then horror, arriving not as drama but as census. An inventory of every witness, every signature, every sentence spoken above pavilion volume since 08, each item turning over one at a time like cards. The jacket slid off her arm. Nobody moved to catch it. Marin Holloway looked at her for the first time since the seawall. Mild, unhurried. One stranger to another across a rope line. You asked whose wife I am. Level as still water. I'm nobody's wife, Mrs. Rourke. I'm your husband's boss. She let it lie there, weightless, 3 seconds, then turned to the man by the fender rail because the last order of business on this waterfront was the only one she had planned all along. Master Chief, ma'am. Your name? Torrance, Admiral. Abel Torrance. She put out a hand still pruned from harbor water, and he took it. Good regrip on that after camel, Master Chief Torrance. Your float was the squarest thing on this pier all morning. A beat. Present company included. Welcome to the waterfront, Admiral, said Abel Torrance, and 36 years of gravel almost held. She stepped aboard the barge. Shaw followed. Lines came in. The coxswain backed her off smart, and the small white boat with 2 stars at the bow swung away toward the carrier, leaving behind one folded jacket on the planks, one pavilion full of recalculating silk, and a pier that would be telling this story in every version for the next 30 years. The reckoning arrived by sundown, and it never once wore handcuffs. No charges were preferred, no investigation convened. The complaint could not be unsigned, but it could be unfiled, and the senior master-at-arms returned it that afternoon to Vanessa Rourke, personally, folded in thirds, with a courtesy so flawless it left marks. There was nothing to prosecute. She had assaulted, as far as the law of the pier cared, a civilian guest who declined to press anything. That was the terrible elegance of it. She was left holding the only weapon she had ever needed protection from, what everyone now knew. The association handled itself, as such bodies do, with bylaws. By 1500, Denise had remembered a prior commitment elsewhere. By 1600, Margot, who had seen it, more or less, been turned partly away but felt the aggression, discovered she had, in fact, seen a shove, and said so, widely. By 1700, an email thread with 41 participants had located, in Article 6, the provision for an emergency transition of the presidency, and exercised it with regrets and warm thanks for years of service. No vote was taken on Vanessa Rourke. Votes are for questions. Her husband came home before the ceremony to change, and found her at the kitchen table with the folded complaint and the folded jacket, both in front of her, like evidence she was assembling against herself. "I'll be relieved," she said. Flat. "She'll end you to get to me. That's how it works." "No." Elliot Rourke picked up his jacket, looked at the collar where his name was stitched, and put it on. "That's how you think it works. It's how silk works. It isn't how ships work." He stood in the doorway a moment. "She sent word through the flag lieutenant. I'm to stand my deck this afternoon." Her words. He looked at his wife of 16 years, and his voice came all the way down to fog quiet. "You shoved a stranger into the harbor, Vanessa. The stranger was never the emergency." Aboard the flagship at 15:30, before the ceremony, Captain Rourke was shown into the flag cabin and stood at attention in front of a woman in service dress. Whites, dry, 2 stars on each shoulder board, dark hair squared away in a regulation knot. Rear Admiral Marin Holloway, 49, let him stand there exactly as long as it took to close a folder. "You dove for a stranger before you knew her rank," she said. "That's the whole file I keep, Captain. The rest is paperwork." She looked up. "Stand your deck. I'll be watching your ship for the right reasons. If you've ever been written off by someone spending status they never earned, and if you've ever wanted to see restraint paid back at full interest in front of everybody, pass this story on and subscribe to Honor Tales for the next one. Some accounts only look dormant. The change of command was 11 minutes long. Ceremonies run short when the person at their center has already done the real arriving on foot, hours before, in a blue dress nobody stopped to read. The band played, the chaplain prayed, the outgoing admiral spoke of tides. Marin Holloway read her orders in a voice that reached the fantail without electronics, took the strike group with 2 sentences, and gave her first address in 9. "I walk waterfronts. Know your water and know your people before you claim either. If a blank line on a form and the truth ever disagree, bring me the truth. I'll take the paperwork. In the family section, front row center, in her best dress and her husband's proudest grin, sat Kayla Betancourt, personal guest of the incoming commander, the only person on the entire pier, the invitation had noted, who stood exactly where the truth was. Vanessa Rourke watched from the parking apron past the rope in the section her own placard had established that morning. Authorized families of command. No one had moved the sign. No one had needed to. She stood there in fresh silk, with her hands folded, unspoken to, unseated, unsubpoenaed, free in every legal sense, and sentenced all the same. To a fleet her husband's boss commanded, to a waterfront that had watched, and to 19 more years of receptions, where every rope line she ever drew would be remembered as the one she drew today. At dusk, with the reception struck, and the tablecloths gone, and the pier returned to its working self, a woman in service dress, whites, walked down the landing float alone. The ebb had turned. The flood was making. The wind had backed southerly, right on schedule, and the after camel rode easy on its new gripe. Marr and Holloway stood at the upcurrent corner, her corner, and read the water one more time, and the water, as always, told her the truth and asked her for nothing. Then she stepped aboard her barge and went back to the mission. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.